Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Wow. Season 2, episode 4, already here,
Alhamdulillah.
rolling. As usual, we are your hosts. My name is Talha Rafiq.
My name is Badruddin Muhammad.
And together we run The College Muslim, which is a podcast all about growing up in America and just talking about what we experience. And hopefully you guys can pull away something that could possibly help you out, or at the least feel like you aren't the only ones out there going through what we are also going through.
Inshallah.
So, as usual, we are not sheikhs, we are not religious scholars, so we are not providing any kind of like Islamic lifestyle advice. All we're saying is how we incorporate Islam into our lives to handle the problems that we do, or to view the world in a different way throughout high school and college than the majority of the West.
Yep.
So, yeah, Badruddin, take it away.
So today's topic is in reference to a hadith that I learned pretty early on in life, and I feel like a lot of Muslims learn, and it's something that when I say it, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, that hadith," or the majority of us are gonna be like, "Oh, that hadith." But this hadith is in Al-Tirmidhi, 2517, number 37. Anas bin Malik radiallahu ta'ala an narrated that a man said, "O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, shall I tie it and rely upon Allah, or leave it loose and rely upon Allah?" He said, "Tie it and rely upon Allah." So this whole thing is in reference to a camel that this person had, and he was asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he should just leave it and like rely upon Allah to like take care of it, or if he should tie it and rely upon the tie to hold that camel. And the Prophet ﷺ said, tie the camel and then rely upon Allah. So this hadith refers to a balance between tawakkul in Allah, but also putting our best efforts forward. And as students, I think I'm going to come at it from the student side of it, because this is a hadith that's been very important to me, especially as a student, because there's times in your life where, even in classes or extracurriculars, where you're going to put in a lot of work into your class or into your extracurricular, and at the end of the day, sometimes you might not get the results you want. And then you wonder, oh, maybe it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who didn't want me to have it. And some other times you might not put in so much effort, and then you'll be like, it's okay, Allah will take care of it. And finding that right balance for me has always been a struggle, because I feel like, especially in my life, I came from a very competitive high school and very academically driven, very extracurricularly driven. And I was the type of person who I always needed to plan. I always needed to know what the next step in my life was. And sometimes, especially coming to USC, a lot of Muslim friends sometimes would be like, just have tawakkul in Allah, like have some more tawakkul in Allah, and don't be so stressed about what you're doing. So I think from that stress point of view, I think that was something that I needed to work on, and I'm still trying to work on, is not having so much stress on what I'm doing, but at the same time having the tawakkul in Allah to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of it. I just need to put my effort forward and not stress about the effort that I'm putting forward. So inshallah, that's what we're going to talk about, is finding that balance between tawakkul but also putting our efforts into our work.
Yeah, so I think I was on the opposite side of you, first of all. So for me, I was always more the guy who never put any effort in. And I was like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will handle it.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? I was like, I never really, I guess, put in the work to deserve what I got for a while. So definitely throughout middle school. And then at least in a couple years into high school,
Gotcha.
like I wasn't the hardworking kid, right? So my perspective was always kind of different. It was like, what comes to me is what I'm meant for through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I had a misconception that I would literally get everything I deserved in life because of just putting in the bare minimum, essentially. And
And what happened when you didn't get something? What would you feel?
I wouldn't feel anything because it was what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want,
Gotcha,
right? So
gotcha.
I
Okay,
kind
so
of
you had a lot of tawakkul.
yeah, not a lot of tawakkul, but I just kind of took it as it goes. Like I will say
Gotcha.
I wasn't like the most religious in high school. Like I had a lot of troubles in high school
Of course. Yeah.
within my religion. So it wasn't always just about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but like I was always leaning towards, and even now I do lean heavily towards like more of having tawakkul in Allah. I do try a lot harder. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying very, very hard.
Yeah.
And that leads to results. But when I do, that has led me to become in a state when I do succeed, all my credit goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. None of it goes towards myself.
Gotcha.
Right? Which I'm not sure if it's healthy or not, but like for example, like with
It
the
is.
with the leash kind of example, like with the camel,
Okay.
it's like I might put the leash on, but when I get back, I don't thank the leash. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah. That's
So
a very
that's
healthy way to
yeah.
analyze it.
So
Yeah.
that's prescribed, like not prescribed, but that's like what it's become now.
Yeah.
But at a stage when it wasn't healthy was when I wasn't even putting the leash on. Right? So
Okay.
I think I'm in a really good spot now, and that kind of became something like that's amazingly helpful for me.
Yeah.
But in the past, it definitely was something where I was like not gonna put in the work, even with friendships, right? Sometimes I wouldn't like put in the work with friendships, and I would just expect them to work out for some godly reason, right? Allah
Yeah.
subhanahu wa ta'ala reason. Kind of, I was like,
Got
yeah,
you.
whatever,
Like,
whatever will happen, will happen. Like, I don't gotta put in the work.
okay.
So now that I do put in the work, it kind of works out better. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I think both sides of it can be unhealthy. Like I feel like for you, like you said, like sometimes just not putting any work at all into relationships or for schoolwork, and then having that unhealthy side of it being like, oh, I'll take care of it. I don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
And there's unhealthy side of it where I went through a lot, which is being so stressed on what the work that I'm putting into, and then saying that the result of that was because of whatever work I did, which it is obviously like your efforts do lead to your results, but at the same time there might be some kind of khair and some kind of hidayah and why, and for some reason, or hikmah, that's the right word, there might be some kind of hikmah and why you didn't get something that you're supposed to get, why you, some expectation that you had for yourself that wasn't fulfilled, and both sides of those can be unhealthy.
Yeah, and the trick is finding that balance in
Yeah.
between. So I think I found that balance a lot
You
more
think you did?
now. Yeah.
All right, how'd you find it? 'Cause
100%.
I'm working on it, so.
Yeah. How did I find that balance? So having trust in Allah is like a combination of two things,
Mhm.
right? It's understanding His power,
Mhm.
and then it's learning how to let go of trying to understand His power.
Okay.
So on one hand, you're like, okay, everything in this world is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right?
Yeah.
Everything that's going to come, so away from tests, away from everything, like literally everything you do,
Mhm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a control over, right?
Yeah.
Like He knows all. But once you learn that about Him, like then that I think comes through like Islamic knowledge. So you start reading the Quran in like
Mhm.
translation, you start seeing just what He's capable of and what, the stories of like through Him and all the prophets. And once you kind of understand that and you kind of internalize the kind of like power and the kind of like, in a way, like majesty, I guess, like
Uh-huh.
when you see how beautiful His power is,
Yeah.
right? That's what I'm trying to say, is like the beauty and the power. Once you see that, can you begin the process of letting go of concerns once you tie the leash, I think. So if I have an exam,
Okay.
right? Because I do have an exam coming up, which I study for all day long.
Yeah.
I tied my leash down by studying for the exam. I put in 5-6 hours of work.
Mhm.
And now the exam say is like Tuesday, okay? I literally have no control over anything else because I humanly did everything that was possible. So I think the issue is a lot of people sometimes like try to play like God in a sense and be like, I can control the outcome of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's where your
Absolutely.
issue lies. So you have to understand like you can't control the outcome, and that's where you let go of what you think you're capable of,
Mm.
and that's where you let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take over because of His majestic power. So that's how all those three things tie in that sense.
How do you get to the point where you feel like, oh, like this is the point where I've done everything humanly possible? Because that's like, for me, that's the point where I have to sort of tell myself that this is the limit. Because sometimes I feel like there is no limit to studying. There is no limit to how much work you can put in. Like,
Yeah.
that workaholic, studyaholic type mentality.
Yeah.
And that mentality is often like, sometimes I'll justify that with myself and I'll be like, you know what? I can put in a couple more hours. I can pull another all-nighter. And you know what? This is me tying my rope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like it's all about like what kind of rope. Is it a steel rope? Is it a rubber rope? Like you're trying to say,
And
like,
that's where the balance
and then
comes
how
in.
do you tie it? How many times do you tie it around the
Yeah.
camel? All that kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
Like where is the balance between
Yeah.
that? Right. As a student in, I guess, school terms,
Mhm.
I think that balance is most struck when you kind of have to prove it to yourself, right? So I think a lot of students are scared to take the first leap towards a healthier lifestyle because what they're doing already works.
Yeah.
Because like if what you were doing wouldn't work,
Or even if it doesn't work, it's just comfortable. Or it's what
comfortable,
they
but
know.
like let's say
Yeah.
for example, like honestly, like the work you're putting in, right?
Yeah.
If it wasn't resulting in good grades, you probably wouldn't continue it, right?
That's true.
100%, right? So
Yeah.
even if you pull an all-nighter and you get an A, you
Yeah.
pass the test. Next time you won't be like, oh, I should not pull an all-nighter. You'll be like, I got an A last time, I should pull an all-nighter again.
Yeah.
The issue is kids are starting so young with like the kind of like work ethic like that adults should have.
Especially with certain high schools,
Certain
certain
high schools,
environments,
yeah, and
certain demographics.
everything's becoming more competitive.
Yeah.
So they start so early. They've never experimented a healthy level of like work,
Yeah.
right? And they've never seen a positive result because of a healthy level of work, right? So they've been grinding their work ethic's crazy. They're doing all-nighters to study.
Yeah.
And away from school, like even in other aspects of life with friends, like they'll sacrifice like other things like sleep for their friends because they think, but the thing is they've never seen the results of what it is to do that in a healthy fashion. So to me, it's the same as how did anyone figure out how many times tying a rope around a camel is good? Like, is it once around, twice around? It's because somebody one day tied a camel too few times in the bad way and the camel escaped. And another time people can go overboard and literally like chain the camel, but then that's bad for
It
the
hurts
camel, right?
Yeah.
And so like what through experimentation, they were able to find, okay, putting one loop around the camel's neck and then tying it to like a tree is smart, not tying it to a rock, right? Same way, students need to understand that, hey, if you did something that you saw clearly have a negative impact in another area of your life, for example, an all-nighter always ruins some kind of schedule. Like, all-nighters are not meant to be human, right? There's a reason why we need sleep.
Yes.
So if you pull an all-nighter and you did well and your camel was still there, great, you change your camel down, but look at the negative impact. So now you see that negative impact. What can you do next time to get rid of that negative impact? You experiment. And I think too many students are like, oh, it worked out last time, I'll just do it again. I'll continue this cycle for life. Rather than be like, okay, I'll sacrifice the 4% or a 5% grade with this new study mechanism, but at least I will discover something new about myself, right? And so when it comes to like finding that balance, it's all about experimentation. And I think that's also kind of like in line with like Islamic ideology as well. Like every human being has a different like limit.
Yeah,
so
sure.
We follow the general rules. Yeah, you have to study from this textbook, just like we study from the Quran.
Yeah,
We have to study from hadith, or we have to study from Sunnah, Prophet Muhammad's actions, just like we study from the classroom, like lectures and teachings.
Yeah.
But after that, it's just like a little bit of common sense and experimentation. You apply it to your world.
Yeah.
You iterate over it. But nowadays, no one iterates, because
that is true.
Hey, I'd rather sacrifice my life. My parents want an A, like, become a doctor, engineer, a lawyer kind of deal. And everyone's like willing to like literally die for that. Like there's kids who commit suicide.
Yeah.
Why would you ever think about taking away your life over school? Why is that even a reality?
Yeah.
Right. That thought shouldn't even enter your head.
But I feel like the thought enters the head because you're so hyper focused on one aspect, or you're so hyper focused on tying the camel.
But that's where you lose the tawakkul, right?
Yeah,
so like if you
absolutely,
had
100%.
tawakkul and a lot of these different things, like whether it be like athletic goals, emotional goals, school goals, if you had that, you would have less of a chance of sinking into that depression. Like, I will never achieve like that. I will never get there. How much do I tie my camel? Because you're like, oh, I don't have any trust in any other forces except myself.
Yeah.
So when you don't have that trust in Allah to be a force in your life, you forcing things down your own gut is going to end up like making you explode. Like that's a problem.
I think for me, especially, like, obviously, okay, so my first year of college, I was very much like in the unhealthy section of tying my camel. Tying my camel way too much. I wasn't like, you remember me freshman year. It was rough. Yeah. So, but I think over the summer I had sort of time to think, and also like I was taking classes, but it was also during the summer, so I had more time to reflect and like pace myself. And I think the one thing I realized that like some of the most successful Muslim students that I know out there are the ones who aren't always pulling all-nighters, aren't always stressed, aren't always worried about what comes next and what to plan for next, but rather they put in the work, there is effort, but they don't stress about that effort. And I think that's the revelation that I came to this summer, is that like I should 100% I should be putting in the effort, I should be studying, I should be doing everything that I need to do to get to a certain goal, but how much stress and evaluation do I attribute to that effort is where I think the difference lies. Because last year I was like, okay, so I'd put in 5 hours of work and then I would go to sleep, right? But I wouldn't actually sleep. Like the first hour, I would be thinking, okay, did I even put in effort? Were those 5 hours worth it? Like, what did I do for each of those 5 hours? Like, was I studying? Was I not studying? Was it worth it or not? And like, there's all this stress and evaluation that I was putting on myself for that effort, and being like, yes, I have tawakkul Allah, but I need to. Did I do everything right? Like you said, like, did I tie the camel multiple? How many times did I tie the camel? What rope did I use? All this stuff. But I think the healthier habit that I adopted this year was realizing that I will still put in the effort. I will still put in those 5, 6, however many hours of studying that I need to study. But I won't think about whether or not, like, obviously I'll iterate and I'll reflect over it, but I won't stress about whether or not that effort was real effort or not. Because it was effort, and then this next step comes in with having tawakkul on Allah, that my effort will be recognized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and any result that comes from it, like you said, is Allah's hikmah, is Allah's will.
And that's you also having to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-powerful, right? Yeah. So I think that's another thing you might have failed to forget, or like a lot of students fail to forget, is how much, because we feel so powerful in our lives. We can create our own schedule.
Or powerless, especially with like professors and like grades, and sometimes we're a slave to our grade book, or our extracurricular progress, or like however many resumes or events or LinkedIn's, and like sometimes we're a slave to these things, and we think, oh, like these things are so powerful. They're such big tools in our lives that have so much power over us. But at the end of the day, like, all these things are nothing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to change your life in a whole different trajectory, He will.
Yeah, and I think like you can also like, you can contextualize that for yourself. For example, like when you get a grade in school, how many of your grades didn't, like, I don't even remember my class grades for some of my classes from high school.
I remember all of them.
Right? You remember like all your grades?
Every single one.
Really?
Yeah. That's how much of an unhealthy relationship I had with tying the rope in high school and my first year of college.
That's so crazy.
I remember every single one. I remember every single GPA that I had
Do
for
you
each of
remember the
the semester.
exams?
No, not the exams, but I remember the class grades, the
Okay.
overall grades.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, but even
Yeah.
remembering like okay, but how much? Okay, I have a question then.
Okay.
So you remember the grades?
Yes.
Do those grades still affect you?
Not actually.
Is it because are you satisfied with where you're at? Is that why?
That's why. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's a great way for us to represent that having tawakkul on Allah is important, because
You'll be
back
satisfied with
then,
where you land.
yeah, back then I was so stressed about the each. Let's just consider each grade as a tie on the camel. I was so concerned about whether this tie was tight enough or whether it was going to be enough for me to get into college and all that. But now that I'm here, alhamdulillah, those things, the tying of the camel, I mean, I tied it. I put in the effort. I got the grades. I studied for the exams. But I don't dwell on how many times or like how much stress I had back then. Now I'm where I am today because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me where I am today.
Right, but let's be frank then. You didn't get into your dream school probably.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're still satisfied where you're at.
I'm alhamdulillah, yeah. I'm very
right.
satisfied.
So
yeah.
it's like,
And
yeah,
that's
okay,
tawakkul Allah,
that's
yeah.
tawakkul in Allah, right? Like you didn't hit your even though you didn't get where you wanted to be, like
Mhm.
right, like USC is probably up there.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong,
Yeah, of
but like
course.
you didn't get to like either the Ivy Leagues
Yeah.
or some of those like pre-med like focus
Yeah, yeah.
programs, right? Whatever. But you're satisfied where you're at because Allah had determined that for
I'm
you.
satisfied now, but I can also contrast this with where I wasn't satisfied. When I
Right.
first got in, I mean, I was
But you learned to become
happy.
satisfied.
I was learning to become satisfied by having tawakkul on Allah. I was like,
Yeah.
it took me a while to get there though.
Yeah. But even if you like, for example, they have to go on like, there's plenty of students here who aren't Muslim,
Yeah.
who don't get into Harvard, Yale, or whatever
Yeah,
school. They get
course.
into USC, right? In the beginning, they're also disappointed, but then they also get satisfied because
Yeah,
the
there's
thing is,
always the whole like everything happens for a reason.
yeah,
kind of
because
thing.
what ends up happening is you end up becoming content with where you're at.
Yeah.
The issue is you end up wanting more. And I think we actually listened to this in a khutbah from like last Friday or maybe 2 Fridays ago. I don't remember it was a couple Fridays ago.
A Friday.
A Friday. There was a khutbah, and he was the man giving the khutbah said he said that if you cannot be content with where you are at, and you're constantly striving like for wanting more and getting more,
Mhm.
then you are never going to like be grateful for what you have.
I
Right?
remember this. Yeah.
So same way here, like because you always like wanted like a better school, whatever, you couldn't be satisfied where you were at.
Yeah.
And so then you were unable to be grateful for what you had.
Yeah.
But now that you're here, over time, guess what? That wore off, and now you are grateful to be at USC and you are grateful for what you have. But the issue now is
The
not
thirst
falling.
still exists.
Yeah, but the issue is also not falling into the trap of wanting more for the next step, right? Because there's always the next step. That's the thing. There's
Yeah.
always the next school.
There
There's always
always is.
grad school. There's always med school. There's always law school. After that, there's always the better job, right?
Yeah.
Like jobs don't stop. Like
There's no end to
there
this
is no
ladder of
end
life,
game. Yeah. They're like literally you. The issue is our world is structured to infinity.
Yeah.
So like, if you work a 100K job, you can make 150K. If you make 150K, you can work 200 a million,
Yeah.
million to 1.5 billion. And the issue is money is infinite. So then you can go into business and make as much money as you
There
want.
is no cap.
So if you don't stop that mentality like of wanting more,
Yeah.
you're never going to be grateful for what you have.
Yeah.
And that's where like a lot of students end up falling into that
But I
trap.
think that's also inherent to human nature. Like
It is. It is.
Humanity is never satisfied, and
It
I'm
is.
sure there's someone in Islam that also talks about this. But
It is. But if we're
Yeah.
satisfied with Allah's what we
Yeah.
receive, then no matter what we receive, even though it be better or be even be worse, we are grateful for what it is
Absolutely.
immediately, and we don't stress in the process of achieving it.
Yeah.
Because what you're trading off is the stress and the pain to
Mhm.
achieve that goal, and then you're risking having disappointment if you don't end up achieving that goal.
Yeah.
Eventually, yeah, things won't, because the thing is these things don't really matter. In the grand scheme of
in the
life,
grand
like
scheme, yeah.
not old person, every person who has lived a very long life,
yeah,
if you ask them what matters in life, very few of them would tell you like things other than like, oh, like I've seen like doctors and engineers, like these really rich people go like straight up, I wish I just had spent more time with my family,
yeah,
or I wish I had done this or that. Because in the end, like you like falling into that trap is just like a miserable way
Yeah.
to live, right? And students are actively living and choosing that life because they believe it will get better at the next step. So coming back to the whole camel tying is like the better, more ropes I tie around my camel will actually be there and be healthy when I come back. But what you don't realize, if you burden the camel too much, it'll end up getting hurt
Yeah.
when you try and come back to it.
absolutely.
So
I think I think you brought up a good point where I think we can shift the conversation to. So obviously we've been talking about like school, right? Tying
Yeah.
the camel and like having tawakkul on school. But I think this is like obviously like this hadith was in reference to many things in life. I think life itself, like a lot of, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is just because we're in college, but there's a lot of planning that happens, especially for our futures.
Yeah.
A lot of us are always constantly thinking about our futures and like where we're going to in our future. But I think specifically for me as well, but like this is something I think about a lot. I think about my future all the time, and to a certain point where I think the time that I'm putting in thinking about it is me tying my camel, but not having enough tawakkul on Allah.
Um,
And I've talked to so many people about this too, and like especially people who think a lot about the future and dwell a lot on the future,
mm.
and that the time that you dwell and the time that you plan out certain things in like 10, 20 years ahead, this is all this is all in your head. You might be thinking it's tying your camel, but thinking that far out ahead and not even realize that like you could leave this earth at any time, and that's like that's kind of where I want to talk about is like where do we draw the line between and find the balance in between playing for our futures. Obviously, like playing for the future is important, but also having tawakkul on Allah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has your future written out for you. You just need to go on the
So
on the
essentially,
right path.
having a healthy outlook towards your future,
Yeah,
without you having to put too much stress or like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Finding that balance.
that's just a pretty good question. I haven't thought about that because I will say like when it comes
Are you
to,
someone who thinks about your future a lot, like a lot, or no?
I'm not gonna lie to you, I probably don't think about it enough.
Uh,
Yeah, I should probably think about it more. Um,
I think about my future all the time, like where I want to live, what I want to do, and like my
Yeah.
family and like everything on all those things. And to a certain extent, like yes, it is important to think about your future. I think especially in America, like I know a lot of people who don't think about their future enough
sure.
because we're so focused on where we are currently. And there's people who think about their future too much, which I'll put myself
Do
in
you
that
do you
in that
ever
boat.
do you ever have that moment where you're like drink like if you have a glass of water, you're drinking
Uh-huh.
water, right? Like you zone out in the pouring of the water and you over pour.
Yes.
Okay. Or like let's say you're a camel. You keep thinking about the knot you
Mhm.
want to tie and you end up tying the wrong knot.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's what the issue with thinking about your future too much. Which is if you don't accomplish the steps leading up to it, you're never gonna get to because are you talking about the 5 year goal or do you think about the future as in like tomorrow?
No, like 5, 10,
5,
20.
yeah, long term goals, right?
Long
The
term.
issue is I think a lot of students do that too. I
Yeah.
think a lot of high school kids and college kids, a lot of high school kids probably too,
Mm.
do that. Is like they
Where
think
have these
they
where have these kids been all my life? All the kids that I've ever talked to are like the ones who don't think about their future
they
a
don't think
lot.
about their future. Dude, I don't know. I feel like either you have people who don't think about the future
Or
or
think
you
about
have
it too
people who
much.
overthink about the future.
Exactly.
A healthy balance of finding one step at a time is very, very difficult
Because
to
I think the
find.
healthy balance requires tawakkul. The healthy balance requires
Yeah.
you to have a certain cognizance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the future planned for you. And that's like that's where my journey is right now.
Yeah.
Is realizing that I have these goals and these aspirations and this painting of how and I wrote this in my personal statement for my college application today. I was like, oh, this masterpiece of like how this big picture that I want my life to look like in the end. And yes, that's somewhat important, but also that's like the overthinking part. The only way to find the right balance between not thinking about it at all, which is like the whole like ignorance is bliss and like
Yeah.
not wanting to like
Concern yourself with the
yeah
future.
concern yourself, connect with what your life looks like in the future, but also at the same time thinking too much about it. The middle ground lies with Allah, lies with realizing that there are certain steps that I need to take, there's certain effort, there's certain ties that I need to make on the camel, but I also need to have tawakkul on Allah that the future the far flung future will be taken care of by Allah.
So what are some things you've done to like kind of help you out with that?
Good question.
Good question. Great question.
I think one of the things is
Or what are something that you have learned in the last like year? Because you've definitely changed in the last year. Like I know like your
I have.
perception on this stuff
yeah
has become a lot more clear. So what do you think happened that caused you for that perception to get a little bit more clear?
I think definitely this summer. This summer I reflected a lot, and I was like, because I was driving like 80 miles a day, so all those drives I was always thinking about like, what is it that I want out of life, and at the same time I also realized that there are certain things that I thought I needed out of life that I really don't. That like when I first came into college, I was like, I need a certain paycheck, I need a certain status, I need a certain thing, this thing, that thing, and like at the end of the day, I don't. Obviously, like money's important, but there are more important things in life, and part of that thing is health, I think.
So I think one of the things you said, but you didn't really catch on to was how much time you spent thinking.
Yeah.
So I think you were able to spend. So issues people think about their future too much when they shouldn't be thinking about their future.
Yeah.
For example, like
When you're trying to sleep.
when you're trying to sleep,
Yeah.
or when you're about to do an exam, or when you're studying for your test.
Yeah.
You're like I'll do better next time, or I'll do better in the future, or if you're daydreaming like in the wrong moments in time. I believe that can be unhealthy. I think daydreaming is a big like problem with like thinking about your future. It's mostly daydreaming.
Yeah.
I think what you had was a healthy mannerism, which was like a lot of alone time. So taking that alone time for yourself,
Alone time. We can talk about that. Yeah.
and then whiteboarding, in a sense, like in your head, or whiteboarding even on sheet of paper or whatever. Like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish in the
I was
future?
taking voice notes. I was while I would drive, I would just like talk to myself and like record it.
Yeah. So like, that's great. So like
Yeah.
that is thinking about your future in a like quantitative manner. Like that is like the like like
I think alone time was the biggest thing. I think like, because when I tried to like think
without
about my
distractions,
future, without
like
distractions,
you weren't
without
focused on
pressure
school.
and
Yeah,
stress.
you were
Yeah,
just driving,
yeah.
right?
Because like I mean, there's nothing else I could do during that time, so I would just think about my future during that time
Right.
in a healthy manner where I was alone. I didn't have any distractions. I didn't have any like other things to do
And
as
there's a
well.
time limit on it too. Like you
Yeah,
didn't drive infinitely, right?
yeah,
So
exactly,
like you knew that you were gonna drive from this point on to that point, and once you got there, you probably got busy in what you were doing. That's the
exactly.
same having tawakkul in Allah is like planning out your future to a certain degree, and then executing on the steps that need to be done to get there. When you're
Yeah,
losing an hour of sleep a night before you fall asleep, or when you're getting zoned out during your exam, what ends up happening is you're sacrificing the steps to get to whatever you're dreaming about, anyways.
exactly.
So right, but you were about to say something about the driving or no?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think just driving in general. I think this relates more to your whole thing with mindfulness too.
Right.
I think taking that alone time for myself, where alone time where that that wasn't time that I needed to spend in another place. That I didn't have the pressure of spending that time in another place because it was driving, right? So that time was already allocated for something else. I wasn't stressed about putting that time towards a useful goal.
Hmm.
Versus when I was in school last year and I was stressed about a certain exam or I was like trying to pull an all-nighter. That's when I would try to think about my future. I was like, it was sort of a get out of jail for like a cheat card kind of thing. Like I was just like trying to like put time away and I procrastinate on what I wanted to do while thinking about my future, and that's where it got unhealthy.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because I think everyone should think about their future, but there are certain times where thinking about your future can be sort of an unhealthy coping mechanism to procrastinate on work and life.
And that's usually where it comes up to, because you're trying to get a like reprieve and be like, what can I do in the
And
future?
that's daydreaming.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's like again, what can I do in the future and not what can I do right now?
exactly.
Because what you can do right now is always going to be harder than what you can like dream about.
Yeah,
So
I get that too because I was like, while I was studying like this, the chemistry or biology that I was doing was very hard, and I was like, you know what, I need to escape from this reality for a minute.
yeah,
So I would think about my future. I would like, oh, like I'm gonna have this and that, and like this is how my life's gonna look.
Yeah.
And that was like an escape from what I actually need to do and the steps that I need to take and the ties that I need to make to my camel to get to my future. Yeah. I think in general, finding that balance is very important. I think that balance comes from integrating Islam more into your life, and that's also how that was also really useful for me too. Because like every time I would drive, I would also listen to the Double Take podcast, or I would listen to Quran, I would recite Quran while I was driving, and those kinds of things anchored me more to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala than this dunya.
yeah,
Because when you're, especially last year, I was very anchored to the dunya more than I was anchored to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala because I was so focused and I wasn't even focused. I was just in it. Like I was into my school. I was into like studying and all, and like just trying to achieve a lot. And that I sort of lost that tether to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. And it's hard to have tawakkul on Allah when you don't have a tether to Allah. And that tether comes from Salah. It comes from Quran. It comes from engaging in religious acts and engaging with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala.
yeah. I actually that's a great point. Like incorporating Islam within that, like having that tawakkul, right?
Yeah.
And also like giving your mind a break. So that's another aspect of Islam that I really like. For example, like praying 5 times a day ends up like pulling you away from whatever you're doing
Yeah.
and forcing you to get up and go do something else for 5 minutes. And it's not like active, like it's like you change up what your brain is doing.
Yeah.
Right. So like if you were studying physics, right, then when you have to pray asr, you don't think in the same way that you were thinking when you think for physics. And what that ends up leading to is like this like mental reprieve, mental break. It's like healing, right? So
But only if you use that as a mental break. Because I can also attest to the fact that when I was in my unhealthy state of tying the camel,
yeah,
even during Salah, like
you were
it
distracted.
would pop in, yeah. It
Yeah.
would pop in about like, oh, like whatever physics I need to study or bio or whatever class or extracurricular
Yeah.
I'm doing. And those things can pop into Salah if you don't have a good balance with tying your horse and having tawakkul on Allah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, 100% agree with that. It's just about how you approach different. Here's the thing: you gotta approach when you approach school. There's only one way to approach it. It's like I need to learn this.
Yeah.
Right. I need to do this.
Yeah.
I think the way you can like emphasize that tawakkul in Allah is rather than think everything that you do that's related to Islam. You don't go about approaching it like I need to like learn and master and perfect this. For
Yeah.
school, you need to learn, master, and perfect to get 100% on your exam. Right.
Yeah.
There, like it's practice makes perfect. Like literally, practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
Right. The more you do your biology flashcards, the better grade you'll get. But when it comes to like the Islamic teachings, like when it comes to like namaz, when it comes to Quran, I think the way you have to approach that is more like I need to feel what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala wants me to feel, right? I don't need to feel what school wants me to feel, right? Which is how you kind of like turn that into a more healthier task, right? And how you incorporate Islam into your daily lives. I think the best way to incorporate Islam into your life as well, and as well as live a happier life, is practice gratefulness and gratitude,
Mm.
as well as help other people, right?
Yeah.
Those two things kind of like trigger like the human like happiness response. Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like if you help someone else, you feel good.
Endorphins.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you are grateful for what's around you, like sit down and just contemplate. Like I go to USC, right?
Yeah.
I go to a college that I'm in love with, right?
Yeah.
I live in a great world. I don't worry about food. Doing those things is what brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in turn giving you more trust in him, because he took care of you. You're exactly where you were meant to be. You
Yeah.
have exactly what you have always wanted. And being grateful for whatever you have. If you are a person who does not worry about their next meal,
Mhm.
that is something for you to be grateful for.
Yeah. Oh, you asked me like what changed. I think being grateful is also really important to that process and that journey, because I was going to CSUN for physics, which is just objectively like they get less funding than USC does. So I saw a lot of students work just as hard as I did, but they didn't have the same resources that I do at USC.
And what's funny is they probably have more resources than some of the community college kids.
Oh yeah.
And the community
Yeah.
college kids don't have the resources that some of the kids who don't get to go to
Or
college
junior
have.
college or things
Exactly.
like that. Yeah.
So, but keep going.
Yeah, but absolutely. I think I learned to be more grateful for what I had, and this is part of Islam as well. Like to look, not to like look down on the people that have less than you, but to look at the people who have who are less fortunate than you, and realize what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, and
Yeah.
be grateful for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. I think too often we look up that ladder of that corporate ladder or that money ladder, and we always look for people. We always look to people, especially at a school like USC. It's very easy to do that. It's very easy to look at people who have more privilege and who have more money than you, who have more just privilege and benefits and things in life that you might think, oh, like that's an unfair advantage. That's an advantage that if I had, I would have done so much better. And maybe you would have, but at the end of the day, like looking to that is really easy. But looking to people who are less fortunate than you and accepting the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you so much.
Yeah.
And this is something that I try to practice every day in my life and it's a very hard thing to practice, but
Yeah.
being grateful for the very, very small things, being able to see, being able to eat, being able to talk. Like when you look to people who don't have these things, you realize how grateful you are, and that helps you have tawakkul on Allah and realize that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me all these things, he definitely has a future plan for me that is worth what I need.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I actually have a really good method,
Uh-huh.
something I do to help become more grateful, and that
Mhm.
would incentivize you to realize how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, which means that your tawakkul from the past has already come into life.
Yeah.
Right. But the method is really simple.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Are you ready for this?
I hope so.
Okay. Basically, to become a more grateful Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't think your bed is comfortable enough, sleep on the floor.
Yeah, you told me this before. I remember. Yeah.
And what that means is, okay, you're like, oh, I want a more comfortable living. I want more money.
Mm-hmm.
Reduce your costs. See how you can live,
Yeah.
right? What that means is, oh, I want a more comfortable bed. I'm not kidding. Tonight, go home and sleep on your floor.
Mm.
The morning you wake up, you'll be like, oh my God, I love my bed. Like, thank God I have a
Yeah.
bed, right? So if you, for you were saying about USC and CSUN and it's
Yeah.
like the other college not having as many resources, you experienced less. You
Yeah.
experienced a harder fight for resources, maybe research labs or maybe this or that. Like, who knows what those
Exactly,
students
yeah.
have to go through,
I
right?
remember there was this girl in my class who was asking the professor, like, are there research opportunities on campus that I could get involved in? And like the professor was like, oh, I don't know, maybe, but like you have to like look around and like check, and I'll check for you. But
At USC,
at USC, it's like you ask one person, they'll tell you like 5 different labs that you can apply to.
yeah.
It's that easy.
And that's like when you saw that, you're like, wow, I have it easy. Like,
Yeah.
I send out an email, I get in a lab,
Exactly.
right? So the best way for you to be grateful and realize how much you have is by experiencing other experiences.
Yeah.
And you'll realize then
That's
that
also why helping others and like doing
Yeah.
community service and and helping those who are less fortunate than you is such a key facet of Islam, because it helps you connect to people who are less fortunate than you and make you grateful for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And also by giving back, you sort of build that gratefulness to Allah and
Yeah.
realize that Allah has given me so much that I owe it to myself and to Allah, and for the sake of Allah to give back to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's like that's the extent of it. Like genuinely, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And then you realize how much you have, and then by realizing how much you have, you end up having more tawakkul, because then you realize everything in the past, because you used to daydream in high school.
Yeah.
You now are living that life that you used to daydream about.
Yeah.
Even though it's not what you might have dreamed about, this is the age that you were thinking you would be at one day.
Yeah.
And you are satisfied.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where once you realize and once you're grateful for what you have right now, you can be like, wow, my tawakkul came to life.
Exactly.
I should have more tawakkul in Allah.
Yeah.
That will come to life too. I will be satisfied with where I'm at. And then the journey becomes more like you can
Enjoyable.
like enjoyable. Like you can
Yeah.
have more fun while doing the journey, even if you're failing or not succeeding or whatever is happening, right? So that's the connect that I think, and like that's like the one thing that I implemented into my life that
Mhm.
like skyrocketed my like daily happiness as well as like my like future prospects or what, I'm like, it's okay. Like, I am grateful for what I have right now. I practice that literally. Like, if I ever feel too grateful for something, I'll like miss a lunch or something. I'm like, wow, I was so hungry today.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, I
This
was,
is why fasting. I remember I was watching
yeah,
TikTok the other day. It was like
yeah,
if you ever feel ungrateful or if you ever feel like your life is lacking something,
yeah.
try fasting for one day. And that's why fasting is such a key part of
We do it for 30
life too.
days.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Because it tells us that there it can be worse. It can be worse, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me.
yeah,
And to have just gratefulness for the risk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you is such a key facet of Islam. And there are many ways to put that into practice. Fasting, or like you said, sleeping on the floor, or like
yeah,
giving up certain things. Like this isn't Lent like for like the Catholics, but
yeah, yeah.
this is just practicing grateful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by realizing that it could be worse.
Yeah, and I not just it could be worse, but also like how much you have.
Yeah.
Like, there's two perspectives on it.
And
So,
then having tawakkul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make your situation better as long as you put in the effort, as long as you put in your good deeds, and as long as you are on the right track. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you this much, like Allah subhanahu wa
yeah,
ta'ala's mercy and wealth is infinite.
yeah, and by learning to be content with that this much, like with
Yeah.
your current bed, if you get more, it'll be great,
Exactly.
right? And you'll become content with that. But if you don't get it, you're right where you're meant to be. Like, you
Yeah.
can be content with that. It's okay.
Absolutely.
Like, not everyone has to be a millionaire. Like, that's just not
Yeah.
the way the world has to work,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Alhamdulillah.
yeah.
All right. Jazakallah khair, everyone, for tuning in to season 2, episode 4
Season 2,
of
episode
The
4.
College Muslim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.